Hello, everyone. We're going to begin shortly. I just want to make sure everyone has a quick second here to hop on. Everyone's going to take just a couple seconds to log in, and we'll start this up shortly. Hi, everyone. My name is Tom. I'm with the Millennium Alliance. We're going to begin the session in just a moment here. I wanted to let you know that we are going to be doing a Q&A towards the end, so make sure to use the chat feature to be able to ask any questions that you may have. I'm really excited here to say thank you to Mary-Clare Race. She's the Chief Innovation and Product Officer at LHH, and we're going to be taking a little bit of a look at the science of readiness, basically understanding the true drivers that influence people to change. With that said, I hand it over to you, Mary-Clare.
Thank you very much, Tom, and it's a pleasure to be here today with all of you. And as Tom said, our session today is going to be all about readiness. First of all, I want us just to maybe check that our chat function is working. I'm joining you today from Dublin in Ireland, but would love to know where you're all joining from. So maybe you can just pop your location into the chat function, and that'll give us a chance to check that that's all working. Let's see. So city or location that you're joining from. Thank you, Tom. So the chats are on the app if you're not able to find it. Okay, we've got Seattle, Toronto, Charlotte, Ohio. Great, fantastic. Good stuff. Well, we will get started, and I am going to pull up my slides and just find those for you. We're here just a second ago. There we go. And yeah, so pleasure to be here today to talk to you about the science of readiness and understanding just really what's going on for today's workforce when it comes to feeling ready for a change in their career. So I work with an organization called LHH, and we are proud to support people through all sorts of changes in their career, whether that's changing from one company to the next, stepping up into new opportunities within your existing organization, or even dealing with some of the everyday changes that come as part of being a leader or a member of the workforce in today's world. And really, if you think about what we're going to cover today, as I said, we'll start with a bit of a discussion around what's really going on in the workforce today, and why are we seeing this, what I call here the age of readiness, where people seem to be just so have such an appetite for change. I'm going to introduce the Readiness Index and the most recent research that we've been focusing on at LHH, and then share some of the insights that came out of that. So just how ready people are and some of the trends that are driving that. And then we'll finish off with some practical takeaways for all of you and an opportunity for Q&A, any questions or discussion points that we want to cover off before we finish up. And really, I mean, there's nothing really here I think that any of us would disagree with, but in the past 2 to 3 years, I think we have been faced with this perfect storm, which has changed the way we work. So obviously the pandemic and the whole crisis around that, both in terms of physical health, but also the wellness crisis. We've seen frequent and social and political unrest disrupt our world on a much more frequent basis, demographic shifts, a changing perception towards work and changing expectations of work amongst the workforce, as well as then things that were already bubbling to the surface before COVID came along. So the fourth industrial revolution and the rise of technology and automation, and then some of those shifts around social and regulatory dynamics. And it's led to the situation where I think the workforce now is primed for something different. And we've seen a lot in the past sort of 12 months around the Great Resignation, but at LHH, we prefer to think of it as a great reevaluation. And I know, it's also been referred to as a great reset or the upgrade. And I love this quote here from the CHRO at IBM, where she talks about employees, they're not just quitting, but they're actually reevaluating the kind of work that they do, when they do it, and really what they want from their careers and the role that their work plays in their broader life. And I think this is really what I want to frame our session in today, is just what's sitting behind that and why might that be. And I think one of the things that the COVID pandemic really did for us was it stripped away a lot of the frills that sometimes go alongside our jobs. And our jobs were laid bare for us to really then think about, is this what I want to be? Is this what I want to be doing? And we've seen people voting with their feet, maybe leaving their organization in search of something better, or indeed then just a sense of just reevaluation more broadly. And so at LHH, we were really keen to understand, well, what is sitting behind this? And is this is this just a temporary trend? Is it a reaction to the COVID pandemic and that big shock that the world had? And what's really driving it? So we set out to study the whole idea of readiness and to properly unpick what was happening with the workforce. And we did this in a way that went beyond kind of the traditional research methods. And we wanted to tap into not just what's happening at the surface level for people and how might people almost respond in the moment or in that sort of automatic fashion, but also what's happening at a more subconscious level. So, tapping into some of those implicit thoughts and feelings and attitudes towards work. And in doing that, we were able to then develop a readiness score for individuals that took part in our study. And what was really remarkable that came out of this was that across the board, there was a high degree of readiness. So an average score of 7.7 out of a possible 10. And that was, as I said, combining both those implicit and explicit responses to readiness. And what we were doing with this study was wanting to really understand, well, how ready do people feel for whatever comes next? And that could be a new job, it could be a new opportunity, it could be some new skills. And again, this quite high, fairly high score across the board. And what we saw, and again, we targeted these 3 countries for the initial round of our research, and we're now in the process of extending that to a greater degree of companies. But within the US, France, and UK, again, all above 7, but with American audiences scoring nearly 10% more than a UK audience. So again, just showing those slight nuances amongst the countries. Between men and women, it was consistently high. And I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail once we get into some of the trends or the themes coming out, because whilst there was significantly high scores across both groups, there were subtle differences in terms of what was driving both men and women to be ready for a new challenge or a change. And then when we look at between age groups, again, I think this was something that was quite surprising, because people in the 35 to 44 age group were the group that reported being most ready to face a new challenge or a new change. And the group that reported feeling least ready was in the 18 to 24. And again, we'll dive into a little bit more detail on that in a couple of slides' time. So what was really driving this then? And again, here we wanted to look at 3 different sets of factors, if you like, to understand what was really prompting people to feel this appetite or this surge of readiness. And we looked at personal factors. So these were things like levels of anxiety, confidence, feeling in control. We looked at workplace factors. So these would be things like the company culture or relationship with managers and leaders. And then we looked at environmental factors, so the impact of technology and the rise of automation as an example there. And if we start with personal factors, so what were the personal factors that made people feel most ready? These were things like the top three were, first of all, a desire for change. So just this overwhelming feeling that you want a new start. And again, I think a lot of this has been driven by the pandemic, shifting people's priorities a little bit, or giving people the time and space to really reflect on what they want from their careers. The second highest factor here was being goal-oriented and even having set some goals for yourself. And again, I think the past 2 years maybe gave people that little bit of an opportunity to think about, okay, well, where am I going and how can I step out of maybe an autopilot mode that I've been in and really set some new goals for myself. And just that very goal setting process itself seems to act as a strong driver for then feeling ready to do something next. And then finally, feeling that you are prepared and ready to progress and that you have the skills to progress. And again, what we saw in our research was that people who've acquired those skills or think that they perhaps have got a skill set that's above and beyond others are significantly more ready for the next chapter. So those were the personal factors. When we look at the workplace factors then, again, some interesting things emerged here. So that monetary driver came to the fore, perhaps some surprises there, but people feeling the financial motivation to seek a new opportunity. And again, that could be an opportunity in a different organization or a different career completely, or it could be a new opportunity in their own organization. The second big driver here was feeling that you had the potential to grow within your environment. So that sort of promotion potential. And then the third driver, which was perhaps slightly more negative driver, was workload, and particularly the sense of feeling that you're working too hard or that you might be approaching burnout. So again, these were some of the big kind of workplace factors. And then environmental factors in contrast, here what seemed to occupy people's mind the most or really make them consider a change or a shift was firstly being worried about flexible working and hybrid working, and perhaps that their employer will follow through on the flexibility that's been afforded to them in the last 2 years, or perhaps some promises about hybrid working. The second one was then just worrying about a lack of job opportunities, maybe within your existing organization or your existing industry. And then the third thing, that's the environmental factor that seemed to still be quite front of mind for people. And again, this research was carried out across the first 2 months of the year, so January and February, when perhaps we were seeing a surge in COVID cases around the world, but people still feeling worried about that health and safety element related to COVID. So those were the factors on the environmental side. And what was interesting here, I thought I would share, was just this breakdown by age. And what we can see here is that younger people tend to be more worried about the environmental factors in general versus older workers. And again, this is a trend that we'll talk about as we go through, this sense of like younger people carrying a lot of the burden or feeling more of the concern, which again might be contrary to what we would have expected when we look at the different demographic age groups. Okay, so the big trends then that came out of this, I talked about these three big trends, and I've touched on them a little bit briefly, but now to dig slightly deeper into that. So the first one was this idea of a vulnerable youth. And again, in these slides that I've already shown, you can see that the younger generations maybe feeling more concerned. And what we saw here was that they scored lowest in readiness across all those countries and by gender. And they seem to be the most disillusioned or disconnected as a result of starting their career perhaps in the times of COVID or in a post-COVID hybrid world. So high levels of anxiety, lack of self-confidence, and feeling that they don't have a lot of control over what happens to them in their career, and feeling quite negative about their future prospects. And I think remote working has probably compounded this in a lot of ways, because they haven't had that same opportunity for mentorship from older colleagues, or even to, I guess, acquire some of those more social elements of being successful at work that you would get through being in person. So, highest anxiety, as I said, highest feeling quite influenced by others, and then you can imagine the impact of not always having that connection to others, how that can have an impact. Lowest in terms of psychological safety, lowest scores when it came to inclusion, feeling in control, their confidence, all of that. And then in the workplace factors, highest disconnect with their colleagues and a perception of not being able to use their skills. This group also, interestingly, when you consider that this age group have grown up with technology and are digital natives, as we would describe them, yet they feel most concerned about the rise of technology. And about some of the, the new flexible working arrangements, and about lack of opportunities within their environment. So there's a real question there about how do we reconnect with this vulnerable youth, and how do we bring them, back into the fold, so to speak. So a few more statistics just to illustrate this point. So over half of them feeling anxious about their next step, feeling that their decisions are overly influenced by other people, that their voice isn't heard, that they're less in control. And this last one about feeling alienated and feeling excluded, I think this is a really worrying that, 40% of them feeling excluded at work. And this is, these are our future leaders. So how do we bridge this gap that has emerged perhaps in the last couple of years for this particular grouping? And then on the workplace factors, again, I thought this was an interesting one. 34% feeling that they don't get along with their colleagues, and again, 34% feeling that they can't use their skills. So again, what has that period of isolation from the rest of the organization done for this group, where they don't feel that they can have those harmonious relationships and that they can bring their skills to bear? And then, as I said, on the environmental side, worrying most about some of those environmental factors like technology. So again, big question there about how do we reconnect this vulnerable youth. Now, the gender gap. So as I said at the beginning, what we saw again was high score of readiness across both genders. So 7.7 and 7.8 for men and women, both those groups. But what there was a clear difference in, and statistically significant difference, was the way they judge readiness and how they feel about their workplace and the people that they work with. So women tended to have more harmonious relationships at work, and they're not prone to hold on to negative feelings about colleagues or managers. They tend to have a more positive perception on that and focusing more on growth opportunities. Whereas men, on the other hand, tended to be a little bit more outward facing when it came to assessing how ready they felt. So having a more negative perception of their manager and colleagues, and tending to be more focused on salary, and particularly salary in comparison to their peers. So for them, taking the next step is often a more competitive pursuit and decision than it might be for women. So what we saw here, and again, I think this is quite congruent with a lot of the research, that women tend to have more internal locus of control than men, but women were subconsciously much less influenced by other people and more influenced by their own feelings of perhaps confidence, anxiety, whether they have the right skills, versus men who tended to be more influenced by, for instance, their relationship with their manager or with other people, and what their chances of promotion are in comparison to others. There was I was talking about this with a client recently, and one of the audience members said, well, it sounds like, women tend to view themselves and become quite focused on their relationship with themselves, whereas men becoming more interested and focused on the relationship with other people. And I think that was a really good way of summarizing the differences here. So on the personal factors, again, just to illustrate this a little bit for you. So women, 11% less likely to be influenced by others, 30% of women feeling excluded at work compared to 26% of men, although I would say that's, that's fairly equal there. 84% of women believing they have the necessary skills at work. So that sense of, being ready to put those skills to work, but yet 14% of women then feeling that they don't have the opportunities perhaps to progress their careers and put those skills into action. And then men, by contrast, are 9% more likely to feel that they can grow in their careers, so having more of that confidence. 72% of women feeling that their voice is heard at work, and yet 78% of both men and women wanting that change in their career. So some subtle differences there, I think, in terms of how they're thinking about being ready for something new. Okay, and then on the workplace factors, as I said, men 48% more likely to say that their manager is poor compared to women, which I think is a big, quite high, and 20% more likely to feel that their workplace is toxic, which I thought was quite surprising, because we often think that women are sometimes more on the receiving end of toxic workplace behaviors, and that those are, those toxic behaviors might be coming more from leadership levels, and with our leadership ranks still being overly populated with men. So I thought that was an interesting trend. And then just an interesting cultural difference here. So French women nearly twice as likely to have to have conflict with their colleagues and fall out with them than Americans. So if we've got any French women on the call today, you can perhaps challenge me on that when we get to the Q&A. And then on the environmental factors, what we saw in the gender gap, men more worried about COVID, about technology and the gig economy, and women tended to be more worried about opportunities in hybrid working and maybe being able to maintain flexible working, and then lack of job opportunities also being a source of concern for them. Okay, so then moving on then to, we'll move on to our third trend, and this was the rise of technology. And again, what was interesting here was that overall concerns about the rise of technology were moderate. So people on average slightly more concerned about more immediate environmental factors. So those, the economy, hybrid working, COVID all being a little bit more front of mind. And maybe, this, as I said on the slide, is perhaps unsurprising, given that we focus a lot, more on the future maybe than on what's happening today rather than what's happening in the future. But still, I thought some interesting things there. Men, we talked about this, being more worried about technology than women. When we looked at it across the three countries, French people tended to be more worried than British people and Americans. And then what I wanted to do was just take a little bit of a deep dive into the group who are most worried about technology, and we've dubbed them the technophobes. And this group is more anxious and much less optimistic in general, and feeling that they can't use their skills in this rapidly changing environment, or that their skills are perhaps becoming obsolete. So let's spend a little bit of time thinking, looking at this group. So the most worried about technology, 36% of the total sample. So quite a high degree of our respondents fell into this category. And to delve a little bit deeper into then some of the factors here that were driving them. So on a personal level, this group feels more anxious. So it could be that they're just a more anxious cohort in general. And that the technology is just another thing that they're anxious about. But again, just considering those anxiety levels there, they tend to have a less optimistic outlook than other people and to the average respondents, and influenced quite a lot by other people. So again, are they influenced by what other people are saying about technology versus their own thoughts on the subject? When it came to workplace factors, the group is working 14% more than average, so high workload, and again, perhaps they're at risk of burnout, and that could be having an impact there. They tend to have a little bit more conflict with their colleagues, so they don't get along quite so well with their colleagues, and they feel like they can't use their skills much more than average. So again, starting to build a picture of this group of people. And they differed by age, and we split them into age here between the group between 18 and 34, who we call the wannabes, and they are very driven by social relationships and by susceptible to what other people think and social contagion, and their concerns about technology tend to be related to their peers and what their peers think about technology, versus then this older age group that we call here the tryhards, who are more focused on the personal consequences of technology, perhaps more than the social dynamics, and they're worried about their skills and their own personal skills and what this might mean for them. So again, I think really interesting here. There is this group of technophobes, but then there's a difference within that as well. And how do we bring them on board with rapid change within technology and within automation? Okay, so given all of that, and be really keen to hear when we get into our Q&A how much of that resonates with you, and to what extent do you identify some of those factors from within your own organization. But what can we do about it? And I think if you think about those three big trends, it already gives us a little bit of an indication as to where there might be an opportunity to to support. So if we think about the vulnerable youth, as we move forward into a hybrid world, or even for those of us where we're moving back to a little bit more of an in-person situation, how do we bridge that gap for those younger workers who've come of age during the COVID pandemic, and recognizing that it's not going to be enough just to shift back to how things were before and expect that some of that, what they've missed, will be filled in. But so is there an opportunity through coaching or mentoring programs to really help them bring that, bridge that gap? Because as I said, these are going to be our future leaders, and what might the consequences be down the line if we don't actually take the time to support them along the way. Then with the gender differences in terms of change, again, I think there was some really interesting and helpful insights here about well, how do we support men and women differently when it comes to encouraging them to take that next step, and recognizing that they're driven by very different things, and that we need to support them. And is that through, I was reflecting on how women are so much more driven by our internal factors. So does that make them more predisposed to one-on-one interventions where they can really think about their own personal drivers, versus men who are more influenced by other people? And is there an opportunity there for more cohort-based support? And then finally, with the rise of technology and this group of over a third of respondents who we dubbed the technophobes, like what can we do to really bring that group on board with new changes and help support them through any changes that the organization is introducing? And again, I thought it was really interesting that we saw higher degrees of anxiety around technology amongst the younger workers than we did with the older generations. And again, that might be counter to some of the thinking that has gone before. Then I think there's a piece to do for us as organizations around really considering, the way that we perceive the workplace and the workforce, and the degree to which we are building a culture of readiness within our organizations. And I wanted to spend a few minutes just talking through this continuum. This is some work that we did at LHH more towards the beginning of the pandemic, actually, as we saw a shift within forward-thinking companies to move from seeing the workplace as, or the workforce rather, as something that's replaceable to something that's renewable. So, again, I'll step through each of these, and then we'll be really interested to hear thoughts on where might you all be in this, and how this relates to helping the workforce be ready for next. So replaceable, what we mean here is we talk about perhaps a more hierarchical workplace environment where employees are required to work their way up, a quite traditional structure. New roles often get filled with external hires. We don't see a lot of changing between departments or sharing of talent, and employees tend to not see the opportunity to grow within their organization. And when they have the opportunity to grow, they see that as being something they need to do outside of the organization. Here we often see organizations, taking a more traditional approach to outplacement, or if it comes to resizing their business, it's going down that old route of exiting people whose skills are no longer relevant and then bringing in new skills. Then we see the kind of more movable culture, and this is an organization that's still quite hierarchical, but where employees have got a little bit more opportunity for career advancement and mobility within the organization. There are efforts to really enhance the culture and build a learning culture and a level of engagement that among employees that's a little bit higher than the previous situation. And here we tend to see a more progressive approach to outplacement, and some incidents, but perhaps quite quite ad hoc or rare, where people are redeployed internally. We do start to see a bit more of a more sophisticated approach to change management and more coaching made available for leaders. Then we move across to this, what we call the redefinable culture. And here you tend to see an awareness that developing strategy around redeployment, harnessing skills, re and upskilling is, that awareness is building, and there's recognition that this is a way of achieving business outcomes. And employees themselves feel that there is more of a appreciation for people-centric strategies, and the culture and culture is taken seriously. So career development tends to be more widespread. There's leadership development happening, albeit it might be in pockets, and generally more opportunities for upskilling and for redeployment within the organization. And then as we move across to durable, again, you start to see here that the organization, it's all kind of ramping up on a continuum. So recognizes a true talent mobility organization with what we call people first philosophy. So the organization is quite innovative and responds quickly to market changes, will be quick to seize competitive advantage and recognize the talent shortage and go after that top talent. Leadership development, learning, coaching tends to be much more mainstream within the organization, and there's lots of opportunities for development and moving into different roles and even different careers within the organization. And then finally, we get to the renewable culture, and this is where we see a real kind of thriving ecosystem around talent mobility, and that the talent flourishes within the organization is something that drives change and that drives business success at both the individual and the organizational level. And there's full transparency and collaboration across the organization around people's development and internal mobility and redeployment. And the organization is really agile as a result of that, and at the front of its field. And these are the types of organizations where people are knocking the door down to come and be a part of it. It's a real talent magnet, if you like, when it comes to the culture. And really, I think this is, if we think about that first, some of that research that I shared that we've just finished around readiness and this high degree of thirst and appetite for change in our workplace. I think we have a responsibility to be moving towards the right-hand side of this continuum and building a culture where talent is seen as renewable, and learning and skills are seen as renewable, as opposed to at the other end of the spectrum, where it's quite static, growth is stunted, and where talent is seen as replaceable. So it's thinking about how do we marry those two together, that real appetite for readiness that we're seeing in the workforce, and then this need for us as organizations to move towards a more renewable approach to our talent. So I am going to pause there and I will stop sharing my screen, and we've got about, I think, 15-20 minutes now for some questions. So I'm dying to hear just any reactions to any of that, any comments, and then we can get into some discussion together. So I think we should have Tom back now as well to field some of the questions.
Yeah, I am here. Any questions? I'm here to field them. So please, guys, ask away. Don't be shy now. I know we have about 30 people in here. I'm sure someone has a question.
I'm particularly interested to hear, both with some of the trends coming out of the Readiness Index, what most resonated and what you could recognize from your own organizations. And then in the second part of the presentation, this replaceable to renewable continuum, where people feel they are and where there might be challenges in moving across that. So even just if you don't have a question, would be keen to hear your reactions and thoughts around some of that.
Any questions from Newport Beach, Omaha, Austin, Columbus, Ohio, Toronto, Denver? We got people from everywhere. I think folks are a little shy at the moment.
Well, it is a Monday. It's, sometimes you get more questions later in the week it is.
Anybody have anything interesting they'd like to perhaps share? Oh, here we go. A question from Lisa Esparza. She goes, you mentioned both a gender and age difference. Do you see differences in cultural backgrounds or education levels?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it wasn't something that came up, that came out as being a strong differentiator. I mean, we saw, and I shared some of the country differences. It wasn't something that we saw being significantly different. There was a slight difference between perhaps some of the European countries in terms of feeling ready than American audiences. But when it came to cultural background, that wasn't something that came out as a big difference. Now we are in the process of rolling this study out to more countries and to more industries. So it will be really interesting to see, is that something that then emerges where there's different approaches as we extend it across across a wider audience. But no, nothing in that first round of the research.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. I've got another one here from Kimberly Taylor. The data shared was very impressive and interesting, and I would say corresponds with our company. What has made the biggest impact when it comes to shifts around retention strategies?
Yeah, so the question is, what has made the biggest shift? Is that it, Tom?
What has made the biggest impact when it comes to shifts around retention strategies?
Well, I mean, it's a really, and what was the name of the person that asked the question?
Kimberly Taylor.
Kimberly. Yeah, it's a really great question, Kimberly. I would say my initial reaction would be that I think, and again, would love to hear from some of you about what retention strategies that you've shared. I think there has been, in some ways, almost a sense of pausing and seeing, is this great resignation or great reevaluation? Is this just a moment in time that, there was, I heard, there were theories about, well, are these people who would have left their jobs anyway during the pandemic and they didn't move because of concerns about the economy? Does this really mean that we need to change anything? So I think there was a little bit of an initial, let's pause and wait and see, but I've definitely seen now a reaction from organizations that they need to think differently. I think that one of the positives that I've seen, and it was interesting what came out of this research, that money is still a big driver for people. But I think one of the things that I've seen in organizations is recognizing that actually having fair compensation and rewards, monetary rewards, isn't enough. And we need to now be thinking about that total value proposition that we're giving to our employees. And we've had through the COVID pandemic, we've had a chance, whether we wanted it or not, to experiment with things like working patterns, flexible working from home, a hybrid model. And I think now employees are expecting and are demanding, something very different. So I think that has made a significant impact on how organizations are thinking about it. But if I'm honest, I think we need to do a lot more around our retention strategies, because we've seen from this data that people they want something different, and if they don't get it, they're going to vote with their feet.
Excellent. We've got a couple more here. I'll go one at a time though. The next question comes from Laura Cushing. Given the concerns of the younger employee base, what strategies can organizations do to support them now to help shift their mindset in a more positive way?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. And I mean, I alluded to some of this already, but, I think there's something about what was interesting was how there was almost this like split between the youngest workers feeling the most anxious, and then perhaps the oldest workers feeling most positive about the future. And I just wonder, is there an opportunity there to connect them? Because what I think a lot of those younger workers are missing is that sense of like mentorship, learning from someone more experienced, learning some of the, I guess, the tacit, that tacit knowledge about organizational life and how to succeed in organizational life that you don't get from, when you're working from home and all of your interactions are on a screen. But is there an opportunity there for, mentoring program or to connect those two sets of workers in some ways, because they almost complement each other quite well. I also think there needs to be quite careful execution of things like hybrid working arrangements. And I've seen some organizations who've been a little bit, okay, so we're moving to a hybrid model and everyone has to come into the office on these 2 days or on these 3 days. And are we really being careful about, well, what is that time in person used for? And let's not just move to a model where we do all of our Zoom calls in the office on 2 days a week, but actually that we use that time when we're in the office for connection, for some of the more social elements of work. And I think for that younger age group, that's particularly important. The other thing that we've seen huge positive impact from is being able to provide things like coaching to that group. So we have a virtual coaching tool called Ezra, which is coaching delivered via an app. It's much more scalable. It's at a much more competitive price point than perhaps more more executive level coaching. And we've seen that be a really powerful solution for that age group who are feeling perhaps disconnected and alone with some of their challenges. So again, I think there's strategies that we can try there.
Thank you, Mary-Clare. This is from Ellen Gifford. She's at Ascension. She said, this was a fantastic presentation. We are currently in a state of redefinable. We started this during the pandemic, but recognize we need to accelerate now. Any recommendations to get to the endurable stage?
Thank you, Ellen, and great question. And I would say, I mean, my simple answer to that is when we think about moving across that continuum, I would say the single most important thing is to have executive level buy-in. And we have done a lot of work in the past couple of years with organizations, helping them to put in place a culture that's more towards the renewable side. And we have a lot of very fantastic solutions to do that and technology solutions. But one of the biggest enablers and also can be one of the biggest blockers is if your executive team, they need to have a learning mindset, a growth mindset, and to really believe that their talent is not finite, that people can learn new skills, they can grow, they can change, that talent is fluid. And I would say, like, if there's, if you only have a little bit of energy to focus on it, I would focus with getting your executive team on board, because they really need to be walking the talk. And then the second thing I would say would be making it as easy as possible for people to access skills, development, learning, and to access opportunities within their organization. And a lot of the investment that we've done in our solution has been around building technology that makes that easier. But I would say that's the thing. Like, people need to be able to know and know where to go and find those opportunities, because if they don't, it's much easier to do that externally. So you want to make it easier for them to learn new skills and to stay within the organization than it is for them to take a step outside of it.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary-Clare. At the moment, I don't have any others. I'm sure with the time we have left, a couple other people will probably ask some. Any other questions, folks? Got another one from Lisa Esparza, who asked our first question earlier. We talked about how to engage our younger workforce. How about our older workforce?
Yeah, another great question, Lisa. Thank you for asking that. And again, this is, I suppose this is a, it's a little bit of a health warning with all of this, because sometimes we can focus then on, okay, this has emerged and we need to focus all on this one group, and then we neglect another. And I actually think that's true for, some of the differences between gender as well. We have to be careful not to make generalizations that women are only influenced by internal factors and men are only influenced by external. But yeah, so when it comes to the older and I mean, I would say almost that there's some of the same things might apply. And that was my, my point about, like, is there an opportunity to connect those two generations? Because I think in doing so, it would be a win-win. You would drive engagement both with the younger workforce and help them feel more reconnected, but also then drive engagement with older workers and giving them some extra purpose and extra responsibility around that, that connection with younger people. So I would say, almost, there's an opportunity to think about it more broadly and not just, to think that it necessarily has to be different strategies for both of them, because the same strategy could, serve both purposes. I also think there's something about, particularly the trend that we saw where they don't necessarily feel threatened by technology in perhaps the way that, we might have thought about that group in the past. But what, looking beyond that, what might be some of the things that are causing them to feel concerned? And is it about, so really digging into that, like, is it about the hybrid working or the new way of working? And again, recognizing that for this group, it might be the most difficult for them to adopt a different way of working, because they were much more embedded in how we were before with a very 9-to-5 culture. I think there's also something about, as we see more of a shift towards outcomes-based performance management or outcomes-based cultures, how can we help a generation who maybe were steeped more in that culture of presenteeism and being measured on time spent at work, to shift to more of that. So again, I think it's just maybe looking beyond some of the obvious things to consider, like what really might be causing them most anxiety.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? We have roughly 10 minutes left. I'm sure we can get in a couple more.
I should have mentioned at the outset as well, Tom, that if folks are interested to read more about the research that we did into readiness, that is available on our website. So folks just go into lhh.com, they'll be able to see that. There's a link from the homepage, and we have a nice kind of key takeaways document that you can download. And then if there's anything that anyone wants to follow up on, I'm more than happy to do that. And as a psychologist, I'm always delighted to get into the data and into the science. So if people do want to access that report and then have follow-up questions, more than happy to take them as well. It'd be my pleasure.
Perfect. And what was the website again?
lhh.com.
Excellent. And I didn't mention this earlier, but we are also recording this session. So if anyone would like to look back at the presentation, we will make it available on this app after this concludes. But we've got enough time for maybe another question or two. Does anyone have anything interesting on their mind that they'd like to learn a little bit more about?
Tom's going to make us go to the hour.
We don't have to. If we're dying down here, that's totally fine. This was an excellent session. I'll give it just another 30 seconds just to make sure anyone's racking their brains for a cool question to add. But if not, we can start to wrap up. That's for sure. I think that is all. I guess we'll give people a little bit of their time back on the hour. For anyone that missed the beginning of the conversation, my name is Tom. I work with the Millennium Alliance here. I just wanted to take a second to thank Mary-Clare for an excellent presentation, and I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. There were really great questions. I appreciate everyone's participation. Dialogue was very interesting. We will see you all at the next session. And just thank you again, Mary-Clare.
Thank you. And thank you all for the great engagement and questions as well. And Tom, thank you for hosting. See you all soon.
Absolutely. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.